My mother's sewing box had been shoved into the donation pile by my brother's wife, a woman who considered anything not stainless steel and tied to a QR code to be garbage. I fished it out of the cardboard box when no one was looking, an old wooden case with a broken clasp that smelled like cedar and hand cream, and I opened the hinged lid expecting needles and tangled embroidery floss. What I found instead was a folded slip of yellow legal paper taped to the underside of the pincushion tray, the adhesive brittle and amber with age. In my mother's shaky ballpoint cursive, it read, "Do not trust your brother. Save yourself." 2 months later, I would use that scrap of paper as Exhibit 1 in a federal insurance fraud case that permanently stripped my brother of his law license, recovered a $500,000 judgment in my name, and gave me back the farmhouse he'd stolen out from under me while I was still picking out our parents' coffins. My name is Lena, and by the time I was 42, I had spent 12 years as a paralegal in a 2-lawyer firm that specialized in probate and small estate planning. That job taught me how to read a property deed faster than most people can read a recipe, how to spot a forged signature by the stroke pressure and the hesitation at the loop, and how to hold my emotions behind my teeth while a client sobbed about a contested will. I once caught a forged codicil on a 90-year-old woman's will because the scrawl on the Y tail lifted halfway through the stroke, a telltale sign of someone pausing to check the original letter form, and that case gave me a reputation as the document whisperer in our office. I'd moved back to the family farm in central Ohio when Dad's kidneys failed, letting my career stall so I could drive them to dialysis, cook low-sodium meals, and manage the books for the small apple orchard that still brought in a modest profit. In my 20s, I had worked a dozen odd jobs, a locksmith apprenticeship among them, the kind of skills you bury like a time capsule and never expect to dig up again. The quiet architect of our family was Dad. He had been a structural engineer before he retired, a man who built the farmhouse with his own hands in the 1970s and never stopped adding to it, always putting a little extra rebar in the foundation, always double welding the joints, and that philosophy carried into everything he did, including the paperwork he left behind. My brother, Jacob, the oldest and the golden child, had gone straight from law school into a white-shoe litigation firm in Columbus, building a reputation on aggressive mergers and a smile that photographers loved. He'd visited the farm exactly twice in the last 5 years, both times with his wife, Courtney, who looked at our mudroom like it was a biohazard. Our parents died on a Tuesday in October, a head-on collision with a semi on Interstate 70. I was at the farm when the state patrol chaplain knocked on the door, and I remember the way the porch light flickered as I opened it, a detail my brain snagged on like a hangnail while the chaplain's words washed over me. The next 24 hours were a fog of funeral home consultations, phone calls to the orchard manager, and the singular, hollow task of picking out 2 coffins from a catalog while wearing the same black sweater I'd grabbed off the back of a chair. Jacob and Courtney pulled into the gravel driveway in a brand-new Audi Q8 the day after the accident, him already talking on his phone about estate consolidation, her stepping out in a tailored wool coat that cost more than the orchard's annual net. I watched them approach the farmhouse and knew the vultures had clocked in for their shift. Within 72 hours, Jacob had set up a makeshift command center at the kitchen table, a legal pad covered in notes about streamlining asset transfer, liquidity concerns, and the life insurance payout. He told me, with the practiced patience of a senior partner explaining something to an intern, that it would be simplest if he handled the claim. He was, after all, an attorney. He had a duty to his bereaved sister. I was too numb to argue, so I gave him the policy documents from the metal lockbox in Dad's study, and I watched him initial forms and make phone calls to the insurance company, dropping jargon like accelerated death benefit waiver and per stirps distribution. I trusted him. That is the ugliest sentence I will ever write. He also contacted a title company that same day, and I later learned he had already pulled the recorded trust documents from the county recorder's online portal within hours of the crash. The digital timestamp logged the evening of the accident. I didn't question any of it. Grief had turned my brain into cold tar. The life insurance policy, a whole life contract Dad had purchased in 1991 with a face value of $450,000, named both of us as equal beneficiaries. There was no trust rider on the policy itself, no complicated tier, just a standard adult designation. Jacob assured me he'd take care of the paperwork, deposit the check into the estate account, and then we'd discuss the future of the property. I nodded. I was so hollowed out that I didn't ask why he had already drafted a power of attorney that somehow needed notarization 2 days from then, or why he had a pre-filled quitclaim deed template sitting in his leather briefcase. It was during the first sweep of the house, when Courtney was making an enormous pile of donations in the dining room, that I spotted the sewing box. She picked it up with 2 fingers, wrinkled her nose at the faded floral decal on the lid, and set it on a stack of old blankets destined for Goodwill. I didn't say anything. I let her move on to the china cabinet, pulling out my grandmother's teacups and complaining that they weren't dishwasher safe, and I tucked the box under my coat and carried it up to my childhood bedroom. Later that night, alone with the sound of the orchard wind rattling the window pane, I opened it and found the note. The ink was the blue-black of an old ballpoint, the paper lined and soft from age, and the words were written with the deliberate pressure of someone who wanted the impression to last. I read it 4 times, my breath shallow, and then I tucked it into the zippered pocket of my purse where I keep my Social Security card. At that moment, I thought it was just the paranoia of a woman on too many medications, but the seed had been planted. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the people who use your trust as a weapon should never get to hold it again. The morning after the donation sweep, Jacob sat me down with a fresh legal pad and a glass of water he placed a little too deliberately in front of me. He explained that he and Courtney had been discussing my situation, and they thought it would be best if I moved into their guest suite for a while. "The farmhouse is too much for you right now," he said, voice velvet over gravel. "And honestly, we need to talk about the mortgage. Dad refinanced in 2017 for $300,000 to cover some orchard equipment and Mom's medical bills. The note is still outstanding. We have options, but it's complex." I blinked at him slowly, the way a person blinks when they're still waking up, and I said, "Okay." He slid a document across the table, a durable power of attorney for property, and told me it would allow him to handle everything without bothering me. I looked at the signature line, the notary block already filled in with a date 2 days from then, the stamp number of a mobile notary listed below, and I felt the first cold tickle of something wrong. I said, "Let me just think about it, Jacob. My head feels like it's full of cotton." He smiled, the same smile he'd used in his law firm's headshot, and said, "Of course, take your time." Inside, I was replaying the note from the sewing box. Maybe it wasn't paranoia. I decided to play the part of the foggy, overwhelmed sister, letting my shoulders slump, letting my sentences trail off, even pouring a cup of coffee and forgetting to drink it. He bought it immediately. I was moved into their 5,000-square-foot colonial in a golf course community by the end of the week. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, off a long hallway, with a private bath, a wall-mounted television, and a deadbolt on the outside of the door that Courtney said was just for the previous owner's special needs child. I noticed she didn't say why the deadbolt was on the outside and not the inside. I also noticed the way she locked the pantry with a padlock, and how Jacob kept the filing cabinet in his home office locked even when he was just stepping out for the mail. Courtney brought me a smoothie each morning and commented on how brave I was being, and I smiled weakly and said I just needed time. Inside, my paralegal brain was cataloging every inconsistency, building a mental case file like I had done 100 times before, and I started keeping a small notebook hidden inside the hollowed-out base of a decorative lamp on my nightstand, logging dates, times, overheard snippets, and the strange undercurrent of panic that seemed to shimmer just beneath their polished surfaces. The first red flag came on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 days after the move, when I heard Jacob on the phone in his home office. The door was closed, but the walls in that house were decorative only, and I was folding laundry in the hallway near the linen closet, a chore I had volunteered to do specifically because it gave me a reason to be there. I could hear him hissing at someone about a balloon payment, and you can't accelerate the whole note. The asset isn't liquid yet. He slammed the receiver down hard enough that I heard the plastic crack. Later that same day, Courtney's personal cell phone rang with a call from an 800 number, and she silenced it immediately, her face tightening into a mask of controlled fury. I watched her scroll through her notifications, and I caught the logo of a credit union I knew from my paralegal work, dealt exclusively in high-risk auto loans, and had a reputation for aggressive repossession. She glanced at me, forced a smile, and said, "Telemarketers." The next day, the Q8 was replaced by a loaner Audi while theirs was getting detailed. Except the loaner had dealership plates with a magnetic mount, and I'd been around enough civil discovery to know what a repo looks like when it's disguised as maintenance. I wrote all of this down. I began spending my afternoons resting in my room with the door half open, but I was actually cataloging their rhythms like a field researcher. Jacob left at 8 each morning, returning after 7. Courtney was in and out, usually at pilates or lunch with friends, and she always locked the door to Jacob's office, testing the knob twice before she left. I had no key, but I had something better. From 1998 to 2001, before I went to community college for my paralegal certificate, I had worked as an apprentice to a locksmith in Newark, Ohio, a man named Gus who'd lost half his thumb in a rekeying accident and could pick a Schlage deadbolt with a tension wrench made from a windshield wiper insert. He taught me pin tumbler mechanics the way other people teach their kids to ride a bike, starting with clear acrylic practice locks and graduating to weathered residential knobs by the time I was a year in. I still carried a small leather pouch of picks in my toiletry bag, a habit I'd never broken, because old skills age like muscle memory. The pouch held a shallow hook, a city rake, a half diamond, and a twisted tension wrench I'd filed down from a piece of spring steel, and I kept them wrapped in a microfiber cloth that smelled of gun oil. The household accident that gave me my opening was a pipe failure under the kitchen sink on a Thursday morning. I came downstairs to find Courtney standing in a half-inch of water, shrieking into her phone at Jacob, who was apparently telling her to just turn the valve off. She didn't know where the valve was. She was waving one hand at the cabinet like it contained a live snake. I walked past her, knelt down on the sopping mat, reached into the cabinet, and twisted the chrome shutoff with a clean half-turn that silenced the spray instantly. She stared at me like I'd performed a magic trick. I said, "I grew up in a house with 1920s plumbing. You learn fast." Then I spent 20 minutes replacing the compression fitting with a spare brass nut and ferrule I found in their garage, cutting the copper clean with a tubing cutter, and tightening everything until it was bone dry. She stood there nervously microwaving a cold pack for her imaginary headache, and I overheard her on the phone later that afternoon telling a friend that I was surprisingly handy, kind of like a sad little maintenance man. I smiled. I was being underestimated, which is a superpower if you're patient enough to let it charge. The following Monday, I confirmed that Courtney had a 2-hour meditation intensive at a studio 20 minutes away, a class I'd seen her calendar for when she left her iPad unlocked. I waited until her car cleared the neighborhood, then went to Jacob's office door. It was a standard quickset knob with a basic 5-pin cylinder, no security pins, no sidebar, the kind of lock a bored teenager can rake in under 30 seconds. I used a shallow hook and a twisted tension wrench from my pouch, and I took my time, feeling the pins set one by one through the vibration in my fingertips. Pin 1 clicked, pin 2 gave a soft counter-rotation, 3 was already set from the factory, 4 bound gently, and 5 lifted with a crisp snap. The plug turned, and the door swung open. I stepped inside, closed it behind me, and worked in the weak morning light filtering through the blinds. The home office was a monument to Jacob's ego. Lucite awards, a wall of legal books he'd probably never opened, and 2 filing cabinets, one tall vertical and one short lateral under the window. The tall cabinet was unlocked, full of household receipts and old tax returns, nothing of interest. The lateral cabinet was locked. I pulled out my pouch again. This lock was a little more stubborn, a 6-spin with a 7th wafer I hadn't expected, but I got it open in under a minute, my anxiety sharpening my focus. Inside, filed under Farm Estate, I found a dark blue hanging folder that changed my life. The folder contained 3 documents, each in its own subfolder. The first was the original life insurance claim release form, SIS 1144 from Midwest Heritage Life, a triplicate carbonless form with the issuing agent's stamp at the top. My name was printed on the beneficiary line in Jacob's neat block letters, and below that was a signature that was supposed to be mine. I have signed my name tens of thousands of times, and my signature has a distinctive character. The capital L loops counterclockwise and crosses down through the vertical stem with a sharp flick at the end, a habit I learned from my 7th grade cursive teacher and have never been able to change. The signature on that form had a clockwise loop, a flat horizontal cross, and a baseline that was suspiciously straight, as if it had been traced slowly from a template, with tiny pen lifts at the apex of each letter. I knew it was a forgery in the first half-second. A forensic document examiner would later confirm 14 separate indicators of simulation, including tremor, unequal ink density, and retouching strokes around the descender. I photographed it with my phone, close up, capturing the texture of the paper and the slight smudge where the pen had paused. The second document was a photocopy of the insurance check, number 0098427, dated 11 days after my parents' death, made payable to Lena R. Kessler and Jacob R. Kessler in the amount of $448,900. On the back, there were 2 endorsement signatures. Mine was the same counterfeit scrawl from the release form, the loop going the wrong way. Jacob's was fluid, confident, authentic, the kind of signature a man has practiced for 1,000 mortgage signings. Below that, a deposit stamp for an account at First Meridian Bank, an account number I didn't recognize, with a memo line that read Farm Mortgage Payoff in typed courier font. The third document was a certified copy of a deed of trust, recorded with the county recorder's office 17 days post-accident, conveying the farm property, parcel ID 32-14-008-017, from the Kessler Family Trust to Jacob R. Kessler, as sole owner, for consideration of the satisfaction of the outstanding mortgage in the amount of $300,000. The grantor signature block listed the trustee, which was Jacob, under a trust instrument he drafted himself just 6 months earlier, naming himself successor trustee upon both parents' incapacity or death. I knew the trust existed because Dad had mentioned it once, but I hadn't seen the amendment. What I found next was a fourth document, a notarized amendment to the trust dated 3 months before the crash, allegedly signed by Dad, waiving the original requirement that both beneficiaries be present for any sale or transfer. The notarization date on that amendment was from a day when Dad was in the ICU on a ventilator, sedated and intubated after a septic episode, a day I had been sitting beside him, logging his vitals in a little red notebook every 15 minutes. I had the notebook still, with the time-stamped entries proving he was unconscious. The notary stamp belonged to a mobile notary named Sheila something, and I memorized the commission number. I photographed every page, multiple angles, high resolution, capturing the notary seals, the check stamp, the signature details. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Courtney. "Amwa home, traffic light." I had about 8 minutes. I carefully realigned the folder, relocked the cabinets, and closed the office door behind me, my heart beating like a piston. I was shaking, but my mind was running a legal analysis like a machine. I understood exactly what Jacob had done. He had forged my signature to release the insurance funds, cashed the 2-party check into an account he controlled, used $300,000 of that money to satisfy the farm's outstanding mortgage, which then allowed him to transfer clean title to himself via the fraudulent trust amendment and the forged notarization. The remaining $150,000, minus some fees, had likely gone into his own crumbling personal finances, the balloon payment I'd overheard, or the repo that was breathing down their necks. He'd stolen my inheritance and weaponized it to take the one asset our parents had built with their hands, all while presenting himself as my benevolent caretaker. But the dead man's switch, the brilliant countermeasure I found next, proved that Dad had seen this coming. Inside the same blue folder, tucked behind a tax return, was a handwritten letter in Dad's cramped engineer's script, dated February 14th of that year, 6 months before the crash. It was addressed to me. It read, "Lena, I've set up the original trust so that no sale or transfer of the farm can happen without both of you present in the county recorder's office with a photo ID and a live notary. Your brother pushed me to change that last year, said it would streamline things. I told him no. I'm putting this here because I worry he'll try something if I'm gone. If you're reading this, trust your gut. The bank has a copy of the original trust instrument with the dual consent clause. Show them this and they'll freeze everything." He'd signed it with his full name, Walter R. Kessler, and a thumbprint pressed in blue ink from a stamp pad. I pressed my own thumb against the glass of my phone screen, almost as if I could feel his. Dad, the quiet man who overbuilt everything, had inserted a clause that required the physical presence of both beneficiaries at the county recorder's office, with current government-issued photo identification, for any conveyance of the farm. He had refused to change it, and he had left me a paper trail to the compliance officer at the bank who could enforce it. I contacted that compliance officer the next day from a coffee shop 12 miles away, using a prepaid burner phone I'd bought from a Walmart with cash. Her name was Diana Rohrbach, and she was the trust compliance officer at First Meridian Bank, a woman with 30 years in fiduciary oversight who had seen every flavor of trust manipulation. I laid out the forged signature, the check, the fraudulent deed, the trust violation, and the notary date from the ICU. I spoke for 47 minutes while she took notes, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Ms. Kessler, what you're describing is a textbook dual-party insurance fraud with a real estate component that trips about 9 federal statutes, including the National Stolen Property Act, if the check was mailed interstate. If you can get me the original ink-signed claim release form, I can send it to the Ohio Department of Insurance for forensic examination, and I can place an administrative hold on any further transfers of the property under the original trust's dual consent clause. But I need the physical documents." She also told me that the original trust instrument on file at the bank showed the clause was never amended, and Jacob's notarized waiver was a known forgery because the notary's commission number had been expired for 2 months at the date of signing. Diana was already building her own internal case. I agreed to retrieve the original physical documents from Jacob's file cabinet on the next safe window, and then I told her about my idea for a wire. Diana arranged for a small, button-style microphone and transmitter to be couriered to a P.O. box I opened under a fictitious name, and 2 days later I had the device, a flat black disc the size of a quarter that I could tape to my bra strap and connect to a receiver she would monitor. We scheduled a final evidential pickup for the following week, and I started planning the last test. I knew I needed to stage a test of their character before I could act. I'd read enough victim statements to know that people in my position often still feel a pull of familial loyalty, a hope that maybe the brother will show remorse, that maybe it was all a desperate mistake. I needed to kill that hope completely so I wouldn't hesitate when the moment came. 3 days later, on a Saturday, I staged a medical scare. I'd spent the previous 2 evenings researching the symptoms of a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke, and I rehearsed the slurred speech, the drooping left side of my mouth, the way my left arm would go limp and my gait would stumble. I even practiced in front of the bathroom mirror, timing my breathing so I would fall heavily. At 10:37 a.m., while Jacob was reading the newspaper on his iPad in the living room and Courtney was scrolling Instagram with a celery smoothie, I stood up from the kitchen table, took 2 steps toward the hallway, and then crumpled sideways with a heavy thud, deliberately knocking a ceramic table lamp off an end table so it shattered on the hardwood in a spray of white shards. I lay on the floor, my eyes half closed, making a guttural, slurred sound that might have been "help me." Jacob looked up. He looked at me directly over the top of his iPad. And then he stood, walked around my body without breaking stride, his feet crunching on the ceramic fragments, and went into his office. I heard the small metallic slide of the filing cabinet drawer opening and the shuffle of papers, and I knew he was checking to make sure his fraud folder was untouched. Courtney stayed on the couch, watching me for perhaps 6 seconds, and then she said, "Jacob, is she okay?" He called back from the office, "I think she's just dehydrated. I'll get her some water." He came back minutes later with a glass of water and set it on the floor 3 feet from my reaching hand. Then he returned to his chair. Neither of them called 911. Neither of them knelt beside me. My left arm, which was actually just numbed from lying on it, started to tingle back to life, and after about 4 minutes, I groggily came to, pushing myself up and mumbling about the lamp. They both acted like nothing had happened, and Courtney even asked if I could clean up the glass before I made a bigger mess. That was the extinction event for any residual love I had for my brother. When you step over your sister's body to check on your crime scene, you're no longer a sibling. You're a target. The confrontation unfolded 6 days later. Jacob informed me at dinner that we had an appointment at the title company at 9 a.m. sharp to finalize the estate paperwork. He said it was just a formality, a quitclaim deed to put the farm in my name while he managed it, but I knew better. What he needed was my in-person, notarized signature on a document that would retroactively validate the forged deed and insulate him from any future challenge. He had arranged for the same mobile notary, Sheila, the one with the expired commission, to be present at the title office. The office was a small storefront in a strip mall off the highway, with fluorescent lights that buzzed at 60 hertz and a plastic fern in the corner gathering dust. I wore a blouse with a seam that allowed me to tape the microphone flat against my bra strap, and I had tested the transmission with Diana an hour earlier from the coffee shop bathroom. The receiver was in a van parked across the parking lot, where Diana sat with 2 special agents from the Ohio Department of Insurance, a uniformed county deputy, and a forensic accountant from the prosecutor's office who held a warrant for seizure of the documents. Jacob drove us there, Courtney in the passenger seat, me in the back like luggage. We walked inside, and Jacob handed Sheila a stack of papers with a sticky note marking the signature page. She checked my driver's license with a quick glance, not even holding it up to the light, then clucked her tongue and set the document on the table in front of me with a blue pen. I looked at the pen. I looked at the title block of the document, which was headed Quitclaim Deed and Indemnification Agreement, and I saw the legal description of the farm, the parcel ID I knew by heart, and a clause releasing Jacob from any past and future claims related to the estate. I then looked at Jacob, and I said, in a voice I'd never heard from myself before, calm and level and cold as river ice. You falsified a trust amendment while Dad was on a ventilator, forged my signature on a $450,000 insurance settlement, cashed a 2-party check into an account you hid from me, and quiet titled the farm into your name to cover your personal debt. You have stolen everything that wasn't nailed down, but you will never own my name again. Sheila froze, her notary stamp hovering in midair. Jacob's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: confusion, a flash of blind rage, and then a blank, calculating stillness that I recognized as the same look he'd had when he stepped over my body. He started to say, "Lena, you're confused, this is just standard," but the door of the title office swung open, and Diana Roebaugh walked in with the 2 agents, the deputy and the forensic accountant. One of the agents said, "Jacob Kessler, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, forgery, theft by deception, and elder financial exploitation." They had been listening through my wire, and the entire confrontation was recorded, including Jacob's non-denial and his attempt to gaslight me. The agents handcuffed Jacob and read him his rights while he sputtered about his attorney and misunderstanding. Courtney started sobbing about her Pillate studio and how this would ruin the fundraiser, and she was handcuffed and walked out as an accessory, repeating that she didn't sign anything. The forensic team seized the original claim release form, the check copy, the fraudulent trust amendment, and Jacob's entire home office computer, which later led to the discovery of a pattern of embezzlement from his own law firm's client trust account, amounting to another $200,000 in missing funds. The legal aftermath was slower than I wanted, but faster than my grief. The Ohio Bar Association suspended Jacob's license pending the criminal investigation, and after a 4-day hearing in which a forensic document examiner named Dr. Helen Krasnoff testified, detailing the clockwise loop, the tremor, the pen lifts, and the microscopic ink feathering that indicated a slow simulation, the state Supreme Court permanently disbarred him. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of insurance fraud and 2 counts of forgery, a 4th-degree felony under Ohio Revised Code 2913-31, and was sentenced to 3 years in a medium security facility, with an additional 5 years of probation and full financial restitution. His assets, including the Audi, the golf course Colonial, and a vacation cabin in Hocking Hills, were liquidated to cover the restitution and his firm's claim on the embezzled funds. Courtney got probation and community service, and she moved in with her sister and a permanent victim narrative. I filed a civil suit in the County Common Pleas Court, and in a bench trial that lasted 3 days, the judge found that the fraudulent deed was void ab initio, meaning legally it never existed. The farm reverted to the original trust, and I, as the sole competent beneficiary, became the successor trustee and the equitable owner. The bank's administrative hold had prevented Jacob from transferring or encumbering the property during the litigation, and the original dual consent clause was upheld as the controlling trust provision. The judge awarded me compensatory damages of $150,000 for the stolen insurance proceeds, plus $350,000 in punitive damages for the calculated and intentional nature of the fraud. That $500,000 judgment, separate from my restored inheritance, has been partially satisfied through wage garnishment and asset seizure, and I'll be collecting from Jacob for the rest of his working life, which, given his disbarment and felony record, will likely be a series of low-wage gigs where he can't hide his income. I didn't move back into the farmhouse. The silence was too heavy, the memories too loud in every doorknob and floorboard, but I found a way to honor what Mom and Dad built. An organic farming cooperative in central Ohio, a group of young farmers trying to break the corporate monopoly on produce, had been looking for land with an existing orchard and a house suitable for a communal kitchen and classroom space. I leased them the farmhouse and the 30 acres of orchard on a 99-year agreement with a profit-sharing clause that pays me a quarterly percentage of their gross sales, a steady stream that lets me live in a modest apartment in town without ever depending on someone else's promises. The co-op planted heirloom apple varieties, Rogers Red and Ashmead's Kernel, and started a small hard cider production that now sells at 6 farmers markets. I drive out there every autumn to walk the rows and smell the same soil I played on as a kid, and I see my parents' rebar in every trellis they've added. A year after the trial, after completing the certification course through the National Insurance Crime Bureau and passing the state exam, I received my license as a certified insurance fraud investigator. I built on the probate document analysis I'd done as a paralegal and the forensic skills I'd sharpened in my own case, and now I contract with Midwestern insurance companies to investigate suspicious death claims, forged beneficiary designations, and staged accidents. Every time I catch a forged signature, I remember how my mother's cramped cursive and my father's blueprint logic saved me, and I file my reports with the same meticulous documentation that won my case. The people who were supposed to protect you can sometimes teach you that the only person you can trust is the one you rebuild from the fragments they left behind. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe so these warnings reach the people who need to hear them. I'll see you in the next one.